Hello, and welcome to Let's Meet the Virologist, a podcast about the people behind today's virology headlines. With the annual American Society for Virology meeting coming up in 2 weeks, we are talking with graduate students and postdoctoral researchers who will be attending the meeting. Thanks very much for talking with us today. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, so hello everyone. My name is Amit Koikkarah Aji. I'm currently a PhD student in the group of Salvatore Chiantia, and I work with hantaviruses. So in our group, we deal with a lot of quantitative fluorescence techniques. Particularly, this group is called fluorescence fluctuation spectroscopy. So you basically analyze intensity fluctuations from your fluorescence experiments, and then you try to quantitatively derive biophysically relevant parameters. For instance, you have dissociation constant, diffusion coefficient, and so on, which then you can then use to address a plethora of how biological mechanisms work. I originally come from India, where I also did my undergraduation, but I did my master's at the Technical University in Delft in the Netherlands. And then I moved to Germany for my PhD, which I'm currently pursuing. So I think that's pretty much of myself in a nutshell.
Great. And how did you first, way back when, how did you first become interested in science and then sort of virology?
Yes. So in my family, let's say it's both my parents were working professionals. So my dad is an engineer, my mom's a doctor, which is very stereotypically Indian because that's one of the two of the main professions a lot of us end up following. And so that really helped in the beginning itself to get used with sciences, particularly with respect to biological sciences, because my mom is a radiologist. So it's not that she would discuss about case histories and all of that, but you would see her, working with X-rays and things like that. And you're always a bit intrigued, how things work and what do you mean by clinical diagnosis and all of that. So I would say that's the first thing that really initiated the interest. And I think, the environment at home as well, when, where you have both professionals working with some sort of sciences, that definitely helped along the line for me. So that's pretty much with sciences. I'd say virology was much later on because my undergrad is in chemical engineering and not in a biological sciences. So back in the day, I would have studied more about petroleum refining or designing reactors for probably like ammonia production, which is not even remotely close to virology, to be fair. But it was during my time in Delft where I worked in my master thesis in the group of Professor Sasha Caneris. I worked on carotid artery atherosclerosis. So it's the artery that goes through your neck. And atherosclerosis is basically constriction that results in, so when it comes to carotid artery, it results in stroke. So we worked on biomechanics aspects of it. So that's what really gave me the inspiration that you could really work on a biological problem with my sort of a background. And then I did the spring school in Jülich, which is in the southwest of Germany, where you basically had people from biology, mathematics, physics, and chemistry all working on the same problem. So it was just nice to see, those different perspectives. Their ultimate aim is to find the truth, but how do they approach the truth? So that's where, let's say, the interest into more of biological sciences started to develop. And the person that really helped me to, to make a base, a foundation with respect to biological research was during my internship here in Berlin in the group of Dr. Oren Moskowitz at the MPI for Colloids and Interfaces. He's the one who really trained me in all the wet lab experiments, because I was a guy who came from a theoretical background, and I remember back in the day I would be the guy who'd ask, should I hold the pipette at this inclination or should I be holding it at that inclination? Are you sure that the pressure is all right, or should I be pressing the thumb a little bit more? All these sort of questions, because you understand the physics of it, but it's a different ball game when you have to actually practice it in place. So he and every member in his group was literally very patient. It was like having a new kid trying to understand every single thing in the lab. And that really cemented me to do my current research in the group of Professor Chiantia, where I've been working since 2019 as well. And then here again, like I've not had like prior experience, too much experience with fluorescence microscopy again. So there was a lot of learning along the line. So, and that's why, like from my end, that's always one message I'd like to give to all the listeners as well. You might probably hear a lot of virologists having, like a traditional biological training background, but you can always start up with something entirely different and still end up doing biological research. It is possible.
Right, right. And can you tell us a little bit about, so how did you actually find the labs that you ended up in?
Yes. So as I said, since my background is in proper biological, meaning biological training thing, it's always a bit harder for people like me, because again, you have to be like really patient with the guy. Like you need to really train him from ground zero, and also it also depends at which phase of the project you are in. If it's at an earlier stage, probably it's a little more accommodative because you can also learn along the line. So it's sometimes all these factors have to come into play. It's not that the PI is being too obnoxious and not listening to your application. You have to also be considerate about which phase of the project it is. So for me, that was often the hard thing to navigate and go through. And like in both the cases, whether it was in the group of Dr. Oren Moskowitz or over here, it was at a phase where they could be accommodative in having a person who had limited biological training and could give training expertise. And sometimes, like as an advice, what I would suggest is it's always good to sometimes go to a group which has experience in a certain technique, because then already they know, if you have to train somebody from scratch as well, it's easier to train along the line. So that's sometimes helpful, particularly when you want to search for an opportunity.
Okay, great. And can you tell us a little bit then more about your research?
I currently work with hantaviruses. So they are a group of zoonotic viruses that are transmitted from rodents to human beings, and that's primarily done via aerosol transmission. I think these are now the words a lot of us are common because of SARS-CoV-2. So these hantaviruses, they're classified as old world and new world hantaviruses. The old world hantaviruses, they create a renal syndrome, and they are primarily found in Asia and in Europe. Whereas the new world strains are found in Americas, and they affect the cardiopulmonary system. So in my work, I've been working with strains both from the old world as well as the new world hantaviruses. And what we are really interested in is so we initially started off with glycoprotein interactions, like how, so like with any virus glycoprotein, you have an overall assembly that take place. And there are some of these interactions between those glycoproteins that dictate the final assembly. So the first part of my research was understanding which of these, meaning there are just two glycoproteins involved, which makes life slightly more simpler, at least with respect to hantaviruses. Like I know people who work with influenza have a much harder job to deal with it. But here you have two ones. But again, it was initially to understand what interactions are critical. And again, we use fluorescence microscopy to give light to the structural aspect as well. So that's where I started. I then moved to understanding about this plasma membrane localization, which is what I'd be talking further in my ASP talk this year. So there's been this previous consensus that this plasma membrane localization only happens with respect to the new world strain, and they've had studies which were not like extremely concrete. You've had some anecdotal observations overall here and there, but nothing concrete to say that this is why the new world one takes place. So the work that I'll be presenting at ASP, what we try to do is try to compare things between the old world and new world strains, because for the old world one, the assembly takes place within the cell in a compartment called Golgi. Whereas for the new world, it was speculated that it'll always happen at the plasma membrane. So we try to do a lot of structural analysis using our fluorescence techniques to see, how these assemblies take place, which of these glycoproteins could be responsible. Meaning, sometimes you'll have the presence of one glycoprotein leading the other one to, to a particular cellular compartment. So all of that, and then we also use some cool biophysical techniques like cellular blebbing, which is like creating these vesicular protrusions at the membrane. So it's not like bursting the cell, but just enough configuration so that you can analyze glycoprotein interactions. So that's what I'd be presenting. But then we've also now moved a little bit more into understanding about interactions between the nucleic acid and glycoprotein as well. We also would like to go a little bit also on the entry factors, like for instance with SARS as SARS-CoV-2 as well, because we had the previous understanding of ACE2, it helped us to accelerate a lot of things. But with respect to hantaviruses, a lot of things are not very clear. We have some initial candidates for that, but that's also something that we are trying to work as well for the moment.
Can you talk a little bit about sort of, how common hantavirus infections are?
So in Germany, they happen almost every year. So here you have the Broa strain, which and the Pumala strain, which pretty much I think for the past 5-6 years, every year around like January or sometimes during summer, you always have an outbreak. When it comes to America, you have this strain called Sin Nombre, and if I'm not wrong, this took place at the Yellowstone National Park in '93, where you had 12 people infected. So that was, let's say, the first big press out that happened there. And recently, like 2 years back in Argentina and Chile, we had an outbreak of the Andes strain. So Andes is the only strain which is responsible amongst hantaviruses for human-to-human transmission. The rest of the ones do not have human-to-human. So the Andes one was also quite an outbreak because you had like 34 people infected and 12 out of them passed away, unfortunately. So those are the ones. But prior in history, there have also been these speculations. So back in the day in England, there was this sweating sickness, which people who watch like the King Henry series and all will be familiar with. So there are speculations that that is also very similar to Hanta. It could have been caused by rodents, and particularly with the Andes strain showing human-to-human transmission, there has been the speculation as well. But Hanta as a name as such actually comes from the Hantan Peninsula in Korea, where during the Korean War, a lot of American soldiers got infected with this strain. So that's where the initial prominence came. But for some reason, historically, also you have, with respect to like the sweating sickness as well, a connotation with Hanta.
Okay, great. And so what's next?
So I am in my third year of my PhD. So I probably have another 1.5 years more, hopefully, by which I'd be able to complete things. And unless there is not like major bottlenecks, that's all fingers crossed, with research, it's a bit hard to say. But yeah, another 1.5 years. My ideal thing I like to stick in academia, and I would like to do a postdoctoral fellowship. Probably I'm looking for a continent change because I've been in Europe for 5 years. And I think when you work in academia, it's always important to work in a diverse environments as much as possible, because we need to, develop that culture, of having diversity, So if you haven't worked in one, it's very hard to, to know and to practice it. So that's something that I would like to do. And again, and like if it comes to topics, obviously I like to work a little bit more on structural aspects as well. Probably a little bit more on like X-ray crystallography and cryo-EM as well. But I'm also interested in immunology too, because when you look at like entry factors and all, the immunological aspects play a very critical role. So at the moment, these are the two ones, but you never know. Hopefully, as time goes by, you might diversify as well.
Yeah. Great. And then can you tell us a little bit about what this past year and a half has been like for you in the pandemic as a person, and then also someone who's studying viruses?
Yeah, meaning as a person who study viruses, obviously, meaning pandemic is like the ultimate goalpost thing, but you really don't want it to happen. There's that very weird sense of feeling, you took up virology right in the middle of a pandemic. Um, Meaning, yes, all of us have been stranded at home. Things have been different. Fortunately, meaning at my lab, we didn't have to have like a major big closure as such. Meaning thanks to the fact that in my area the case incidence rates didn't like explode over the roof, so that really helped. But yeah, the main toll has been on the personal life, because let's be honest, like right now my home is literally my holiday destination, my entertainment hub, and I don't like that at all. It took quite a while to get used with that. And also the fact that you have like limited social interaction, that also kind of impacts the way, like now when you find a person, you're not like really sure, should I go, should I stand aside, should I be I don't know, like I don't know what normal interaction felt like before 2090. That I think is a mystery in itself. Yeah, so it's a lot more to do with on the personal front. And again, like my family, my parents are residing in Qatar. They're working there. I haven't seen them now for the past 2 years, so that also feels weird. Like for them, I'm the only child at home, so say for them it's been a much harder toll as well. So not meeting them, not seeing anybody else, being confined in a certain shell, meaning as a person who's studying it, you know the relevance about it, but it's just that the mind is not accustomed with it. And I really hope we don't have to live through this again. Like with better planning, we don't have to do this again. Yeah.
Right, great. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate talking with you.
Same here, Larissa.
This has been Let's Meet the Virologist, a podcast about people who study viruses. This is your host, Larissa Thackeray, and thanks for listening.